should stop using the words climate change. We should name it for what it is, climate chaos. We should stop using more neutral vocabulary and talk about, the end of life on Earth as we've known it. The Earth will continue. It's 4.6 billion years old. It will outlive us. But I think we have changed the conditions for life on Earth so much that we need to speak the truth. And I'm here today to speak my truth to you and get you to go on a journey with me in these next 45 minutes or so. I've also got PowerPoints. I don't really like using them that much, but Ed's PowerPoints always inspire me. And I also want to make sure that there's a record of what we need to do and give you a little bit of a big picture map for what we're all going to do together to help us through these dark, difficult times and to get to a place where we're all thriving, and not just surviving, thriving in the kind of beautiful urban and nature kind societies that we know that we can live in and already are creating. So now I've got to remember my clicker. Okay, so my story is going to be in the form of a roller coaster ride, one of those corkscrews. So we're going to go through many twists and turns, and I would ask you to buckle up, and the two things that you can use as your safety rails are two propositions. One is that 2030 is the new 2050. Yeah, that's the date. And the second one is, you are the leaders you've been waiting for. Okay, so those two propositions are your safety rails. When they pull that thing down in front of you as you get on the roller coaster and you have to hold on to it very, very tight. Those two propositions are what I'd like you to keep hold of as we go through the corkscrew of different things that are happening, which I think you need to know about, which I hope you will take comfort from, and also know why it is that you and your contributions are so important. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of my own story, following up from that period, actually, that Ed said, when we lost contact a bit and you didn't quite know what I was up to. We're going to look at what is going on internationally. Where are we in the international climate response? I still follow the climate change negotiations very closely, and I'll take you through a little bit of why there is such concern now amongst the scientists, amongst the lawyers, amongst the publics at large, what we agreed to deliver, what we have actually delivered, and tell you why this year of all years is even more important, not just for the climate meetings that we have going on, but also because we've got what's called a sort of super year. We've got a cluster of really important UN meetings. And those UN meetings are locking into national planning cycles where we're supposed to protect also nature, biodiversity and the oceans, and also deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. So 2020 is really it. It's a super year. And I'm going to talk you through the fact that there are so many other leaders, so many other social movements, so many other actors that are rising up to address what needs to happen next. And of course that you, as the architects and the designers and the people who literally build what we all need to, are absolutely key in that. So yeah, my key conclusions, in case we run out of time. Yeah, we all need to be disruptors. Okay, my disruption in the end, as a result of a lot of reading, a lot of angst, a lot of burnout and exhaustion, led me to glue myself to the headquarters of Shell, the oil giant, headquarters in London. And I'll tell you why, what was my tipping points for doing that. But right now, business as usual, which is all around us, we're all in it, we're living it every day. Our lived experience is business as usual, and we need to become disruptors and rise to the challenge of changing it. We were supposed to stop dangerous climate change. That's the legal phrasing in the Climate Change Convention negotiated in 1992 when I was a very young lawyer. the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, when I'd had 2 small children at the time, and the 2015 Paris Agreement that Ed talked about, which was to replace and provide an overarching treaty to replace those, to replace Kyoto. We were supposed to protect nature through the Biodiversity Convention and many other treaties. We were supposed to achieve prosperity and leave no one behind from the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. And instead, we are in the middle of the 6th mass extinction. Literally, nature and its systems are dying. We've got climate breakdown already. It's already here. 4 out of the 9 planetary boundaries have been breached. We've got climate apartheid. Okay, that's not my words. That's the word of the UN Human Rights Rapporteur. We've got the rights of some people, some communities that are protected, and the rights to life, to well-being, to livelihoods of huge numbers of people, billions of people all over the planet, that are going to be utterly disrespected and utterly overrun. So I don't know what better word to name it other than that. He named it as climate apartheid. I think it's an appropriate word. And lawyers, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking, what is the right frame, what is the right words? We've got, as I speak, borders and walls, legal, hard borders, visas, excluding those who are now fleeing uninhabitable parts of the world. We've got a food failure system. We've got both too many obese people in the world, essentially, and all the diseases that go with that. Heart disease, diabetes, you name it, you're all aware of them. Around 2 billion people, and imposing a huge burden, actually, on national health services and their families. And we've got both obesity and malnutrition and starvation all at the same time. So around half the world's population is extremely unhealthy, you know, at both ends of the spectrum. Very divided, polarized systems that are giving rise to this sort of trend. So, yeah, when we need to fix this, I have luckily 4 children from 25 to 12, and they and their generation, you know, from Seven Suzuki in 1992, who I saw in the Rio conference when she spoke. I couldn't remember and claimed the $28 that Cole offered yesterday. Yeah, our kids understand what's going on, and they have seen firsthand, actually, the breakdown of our social systems. In the UK, it's the same, in Europe and in the US. They've seen a breakdown of social welfare, and they've seen a diminishing of their life chances already, and they're never going to forgive us. They really are not. They get it. They're not going to forget. This is a generational, you know, change of values. Already, we're going to get sued by not just the kids. They're launching cases left, right, and centre, but by our clients. I'll talk a little bit about that. And by vulnerable communities, you're going to get sued. I'm pretty sure of it. And by vulnerable peoples everywhere. They're going to ask, why didn't you build this building to better standards? You know, why didn't you give me these choices? I'm pretty certain that will happen. None of us enjoy living in the kind of, you know, broken wreckage of a society that is creating such high levels of inequality and such high levels of social stress. And there's a really big price being paid in terms of our mental and physical sort of consequences. But luckily, you know, my conclusions are that we already have the technologies, we already have the know-how, we already have the networks, and we know that these create much better alternatives and new jobs, and new movements have already understood that and are demanding that. So, moving on quickly, I want to pay a small tribute to Ed too. These are pictures taken from the Empire State Building, and we had an event there on September the 14th, 2014, which was a big summit organized by the then UN Secretary General called Ban Ki-moon, a year ahead of Paris. So, you know, to try and get governments to already come forward with big commitments. You know, we chose the Empire State Building because Skanska it's a LEED Platinum building, right? this is back then. And we had a very important meeting there where the lions and the lionesses, we had 2 panels actually, 5 women on one, 5 men on the other, with 1 woman and man on each for a little bit of balance. We had the People's Climate March, which was I think 750,000 people, huge marches. So these things have been going on for a while. We had reports that I had put together with colleagues at Track Zero, very much based on evidence. You know, as an attorney, what's your special skill? As an attorney, you have a proposition and then you find your witnesses. You get the witnesses and the proof that you need to make it compelling to the audience that you're trying to persuade. And for me, Ed was very much that person who came forward and said, the builders and the architects of the world, the designers and construction industry can do this. They can deliver net zero by 2050. So thank you, Ed, for doing that. And there's a few of the lovely lionesses. I also showed you that picture because it's the same outfit that I'm wearing from there. And I'll talk about that. So yeah, I want to say a little bit about why I haven't stopped being the lawyer and the strategist and the organizer. I've just added the word activist to my CV. And I'm asking you all to do that too. You all need to be standing upright and showing up for what you can do. You need to integrate all of your identities. I'm integrating mine, you know. It was very much before, like I'm a lawyer, you know, I do this legal stuff. I had put my identity as a mother, as a migrant. I came to the UK when I was 9 as a Muslim. And as a citizen, I sort of put them in separate boxes. And I think for me, after Paris, you know, one of the main things was actually reintegrating and connecting my different identities. And really feeling, you know, the power that comes from that. It's not just the power of a lioness, it's like my whole self needed to be involved in this fight for climate justice. And it's not a fight that we can have, you know, with either or, with this binary way of thinking, oh, it's system change, let's do it through politics, let's do it through a bit of advocacy, or personal change, you know, let me make changes to my lifestyle, and it's both. We have to do all of those things, and we have to do them all at the same time, and we mustn't get bogged down in whether our professionalism is damaged as a result of standing up for what is now the biggest crisis facing us all. So, why did I choose to get arrested? Well, after Paris, we had a very intense year in 2016, where with the Obama administration and with the high ambition coalition countries decided we've got to get Paris to enter into force, what we call legal entry into force. Like every legislature of the world has different procedures, but has to pass the international treaty in order for it to become law. And that happened in 2016. And then also in 2016, we had your election in November, and we had the Brexit referendum in Europe in June. So actually, when we look back, there were some pretty fundamental shifts going on in society. And after Paris came into force in 2017, I was like literally burnt out and exhausted. And I think seeing the rise of, frankly, ethno-nationalist, climate-denying governments, or coming into power, was an additional factor on top of my physical and emotional stress. And I literally had to take a year off, so that's why I sort of stepped back. And I did a lot of courses on nature connection, and I went for walks with my dog on the heath, and I just had to physically step back at that time. I was also going through an intense period of mourning. Both my parents and my older brother had died within 3 years, just from the end of Paris and over those things. And sometimes you need to kind of stop. And it seemed like my 25 years at that time of being away as a mother with young kids and organising, so many different events, coalitions and others, it really seemed like I'd wasted my life. That's how it felt. I got back, the UK government, very high, ambition country leader, did nothing for Paris, did nothing. I'll come back to that later, because the Court of Appeal last week ruled that most of the government's decisions, including Heathrow expansion, is illegal because they haven't done an assessment of it against the Paris targets. But during that time, it felt very bleak. It felt like we were entering a world of lawlessness. We were entering a world where the fossil fuel companies, business as usual, agribusiness as well, I have to add, were absolutely in the ascendant. And they had destroyed, essentially, any prospect of what we call the Paris pathway. The Paris pathway was this cycle of 5-year ratcheting up of ambition. I'm wearing my ambition badge, and that was the engine, the heart of the Paris Agreement. We knew in Paris itself that the commitments, the national plans that governments had tabled at that point already didn't add up to 2 degrees, let alone well below, let alone 1.5, which we got included. So it felt like a very sort of bleak time, and nature, restored me. And I also found out about this group called Extinction Rebellion, which was really forming in a very small group of people who said it's time to take, non-violent civil disobedient action. That's what we need, on top of all the petitions, on top of, the normal lobbying of MPs and so forth. And my 2 triggers for joining the rebels were the publication of the IPCC report on pathways to 1.5 degrees, which was mandated by the Paris Agreement in 2015. It came out in October 2018, that agreement, that report, essentially outlining the massive difference between a 2-degree target and a 1.5 degree target. How many more millions of people, in summary, are affected by that little increment globally, and especially the small island and vulnerable countries. And for me, it was personal, because I had been in these climate change negotiations with my small island countries, with the presidents. I've acted for 2 presidents, the president of the Maldives, the president of the Marshall Islands. And it was in 2009 that they had put forward the 1.5 target. They'd said, we don't want 2 degrees. 2 degrees is not only going to kill us, it's going to kill the planet. The scientists are all saying this. From 2009 to 2018 is when the report came out. And that decade of being worn down by the delayers, by the deniers, by countries whose economies are utterly dependent on fossil fuel, and whose strategy is essentially to delay quarter by quarter, year by year, 5 years by 5 years, so they can carry on making profits. Really, I don't know, it just ate at my soul, and it ate the theory of change that I work on, and my value system, which is, truth can speak to power, and power should listen, and our politicians should act on evidence. That's kind of what I've learned. That's what I act on. That's my whole life is built around that. And to see that utterly, destroyed and not the case, it caused me to really be quite depressed, and then to become a rebel. And the true triggers were, the IPCC report and Extinction Rebellion in October of 2018 in London. When that report came out, lots of other NGOs were doing briefings and doing amazing, wonderful work. And Extinction Rebellion did a mass die-in and had Greta Thunberg come, and they read out a declaration of rebellion, and lots of people were arrested. And I thought, yes, that is the right response to this report. I want to be with that group that is doing that. And the second report, which was the trigger for me actually gluing myself to Shell, was, I'll just go back to that, was a report by a group called Influence Map, and it came out in March 2019, so just a few weeks before I got arrested. And it essentially showed, the big oil companies had spent billions since the Paris Agreement on lobbying, marketing, and greenwashing. And I felt like there's no report that I can write. No one's going to give me 200 million to go and, do this. Foundations, and I work in the NGO sector, give a lot of money, but there's nothing compared to this scale. So that was for me, and I'm saying this to you because I feel that's the truth, and we need to talk about this. We need to talk and say that our political system is stuck, and why it's stuck, and what we can do to get out of it. Just very quickly, a lot of people ask me, and I've simplified the personal side as well as the systemic change side into 5 F's. So yeah, food. My household didn't used to do all of these things. I think we've had this disconnect that my contribution was to climate action was flying around doing lots of meetings. But now the whole family has more or less switched to an entirely plant-based diet. We have meat occasionally. And if everyone did that, especially in the US and high meeting countries, you'd free up an area the size of India, essentially, for nature and for better, healthier foods. Fashion, totally into vintage, recycling, upcycling. Again, fashion industry is a massive polluter. It has emissions roughly the size of Russia. These are important ways to talk about these big emissions and to act on them. Flights, I learnt the other day that half of the flights from the UK for this age of men are for stag nights, for parties. Really, they are. I've fact-checked this. This is true. And for hen nights, this is in the UK. It may not be true of all countries, but we are, that's what we have to kind of start getting to grips. All of this will end now with coronavirus, but anyway. But we have questions to answer, like what have we decided is the basis for airport expansion? Is it this? It is. Most of the time it is. Finance, a huge success story is going on, but it's happening incrementally and still too late to make the big changes, which is the finance sector, which is basically your money and mine, in the form of taxes and in the form of private banks, is still going to the dirty economy. And that's one of the big goals of Paris, is to shift finance from brown to green, from dirty forms of development to green ones. And yeah, there is BlackRock, JP Morgan, Barclays, others are making changes, but they're also still, by and large, funding a huge amount of destruction. And they're culpable, and that will change. And then finally, I added this friends. Okay, so every single study, I'm very evidence-based really, study shows that the thing that gives you the best chance of a quality life and longevity is friends and family. And you literally die unhappier and younger if you don't have friends and if you're lonely, friends and family. So part of what we need to do is surround ourselves and be really embedded in communities. And our fight for climate action has to go hand in hand with all the other things that are going on in our communities. So very quick diversion, and then we're going to go on the roller coaster of what's happening in the world. So I was supposed to be here for 2 more days, but I'm flying back to the UK tonight because we are in the grip of a global pandemic. It hasn't been labelled as that because of different reasons, but I think it's going to fundamentally alter the way in which we all live globally, actually, for some time to come. There's a great article that I read that just came out a day or 2 ago. What can we learn, and why were people like me, Extinction Rebellion, and many others saying, let's shift to an emergency mode messaging? And it's because when you're in an emergency, you act faster, quicker, your survival instincts, your old brain kicks in, your values shift, you have institutional collaboration, our structures of government are completely different, and you're seeing them kick in now. You guys will see them kick in about a week's time, because you're a week or 2, you're slightly behind. In Europe, that's always, in the UK, it's already happened, and we've got basically supermarkets on alert. We've got our health system is already called up people who've retired, nurses and doctors. We've just shifted the legislation which allows you to claim sick pay from the government from day 1 of your sickness, to make sure that people can self-isolate without feeling they have to go to work. So when this emergency sense comes in, it's a really powerful thing, and sadly it's been almost missing for climate change, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in. So let me turn now to the bigger overview, and why your efforts are going to be so much more needed than we thought. Well, international government response, what we've promised and what we've delivered. I'm just going to focus not on all of Paris, which is a very complicated treaty, but it addresses loss and damage, addresses resilience, addresses finance, and I'm just going to focus on the temperature goal, which is avoiding dangerous climate change and mitigation of greenhouse gases, and these national plans called Nationally Determined Contributions, NDC. So, yeah, we've achieved a lot, in the last 30 years. We've got these 3 treaties, we've got the Sustainable Development Goals, we've got thousands and thousands of national climate laws, and we've got new and national institutions that have been set up and created specially to deal with climate action. And we've got hundreds of COP decisions, we've got hundreds of lawsuits. But the sum is basically they have not delivered the end results. Okay, so this is a slide I use, and I don't expect you to read it, and I know people in the back can't read it probably at all. But I use it in my lectures to students, except now instead of saying the timeline of the climate science and policy, I just call it climate culpability. What did you do when you knew? And it goes back to 1988, when international action was taken to create a UN panel, and the darker blue squares, mainly at the top, are all the scientific reports, where we've had 5 major scientific reports from the UN, including, from the IPCC, roughly every 5 to 7 years. The next one's June 2023. And then the lighter green ones are the legal responses, so the 1992 treaty, the 97 protocol, the Paris Agreement. And I think, in years to come, people will look at that slide, not just as a science policy slide, but yeah, what did you know when you knew? And we now know that many industry players, the big oil especially, knew a decade before this, actually, and already had set up their strategies to campaign for climate obfuscation and set up campaigns to do that. So yeah, we've done pretty well, but we haven't got really as far as we need to. And this is the summary of the IPCC report that I mentioned. Took 10 years to get out, and was campaigned for by 120 small island states and vulnerable countries. In a nutshell, the purple, all you need to see is the purple is the danger levels. It's very high risk to high numbers of people, and most of those are irreversible. So coral reefs dying is a huge one, and the risk of water and food shortages are the ones that impact the people most. And obviously you've got a meltdown of glaciers, and you've got permafrost. I can go on and on, but you get the picture from the slides. These are pretty devastating. As I said, 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries are now formally breached. This is an independent bit of research and a framework for understanding what is the safe space for humanity to be in. And I've highlighted in green, this was presented to Davos in 2015. So, we had Davos this year, which came out with lots of announcements by lots of companies. But again, if you look at it from the lens of culpability and why didn't we take action earlier, this came out 5 years ago. So yeah, again, you don't need to see all of the countries that are here. It's an independent analysis called Carbon Tracker that looks at the government plans that have been submitted against the 2-degree target and against the 1.5-degree target. And basically, there's not a single country in the world that comes as a role model. It's not like someone solved it. There's 2 countries in the world whose national plans are deemed compatible with a 1.5 scenario. That's Morocco and the Gambia. We've got other countries, mainly smaller countries, India especially is a much larger country where the plans are compatible with a sort of 2-degree pathway. There's a very complicated methodology. And actually, most governments don't dispute this whatsoever. And then the vast majority of the richer world, the OECD, sadly the US, Russia, are all in the critically insufficient category. They have not put forward actions that are compatible with Paris and are way behind. Similar graphs, I think Ed showed some of them earlier on, showing now actually emissions are rising. This could be temporarily, we don't know how coronavirus will impact us, but initially it will slow down economic growth and CO2 emissions. Yeah, and the Earth is heating up. So post looking really at last year, so it's the bigger countries that are not now signing up to refreshing their national climate pledges, their national plans. So they're supposed to come to this big meeting, which is now the follow-up to Paris, which is going to be held in Glasgow. Everything's contingent on Corona, but it will probably be held in some virtual or some other way, I'm sure. So this 5-year update, the bigger countries have essentially not stepped up. Most of the smaller countries, it's now around 100 actually, since that slide was prepared, have said that they will revise their national plans and they will bring a higher level of ambition. But the smaller countries are not the biggest emitters, and they're also causing, they're also suffering from impacts, and their emissions are not going to blow the carbon budget. So, good news. Leaders are emerging. Here's many different types of business coalitions that are presenting new actions that are compatible with science and taking action much quicker than the 2050 timeline. A recent study concluded that over nearly 50% of the world's economy essentially is covered by net zero goals, net zero by 2050. They either have the legislation or are intending to put that into place, which is meant to be good news. And I was, it's like, do you see the glass half full or empty? But it's good news. And today, actually, as I speak, the European Union announced its new climate law, and that it's legislating for net carbon neutrality by 2050, net zero by 2050, which is, again, a really amazing positive achievement, which we should feel really proud of. But I'm like, why the hell did it take 5 years? But anyway, it's coming. It's coming. And here is what the climate action orientated part of your politicians presented to, and businesses presented to the COP, the Conference of the Parties in Madrid a few months ago. Madrid was one of the last preparatory COPs before this big one. And actually, I've highlighted in yellow, they presented 2 scenarios. One is for the US to reduce emissions 37% below 2005 levels by 2030, and then the other one is 49% by 2030. And the current European debate that's going on, what should be the European 2030 target? That's the big elephant in the room in the EU. It's not in the climate law that they just put forward and are being very heavily criticised for picking the 2050 date without saying what's the 2030 date. And the 2030 dates that they're going to put forward are 50 to 55%, but actually they need to put forward 65%. So if you compare that with what the US is proposing, we need all of these countries to step up. Okay, so we need to speed up delivery, and we need to make up for lost time, and I do too, because I'm a bit behind in this presentation. So this is a time, and this is a time frame of the key diplomatic moments. And again, you may not be able to see it. I hope you'll get the slides later. And all of these red meetings at the bottom are absolutely critical. And again, who knows how and when they will happen. But we have the EU-China summit in September. We have a major treaty called the Biodiversity Treaty, and the meeting was supposed to be in China. They hope to still hold it at this point in time. We have the US holding the chair of the G7 countries, that's the 7 most powerful countries in the world. We have Saudi Arabia holding the chair of the G20 countries, that's the 20 most powerful economies in the world. These are not climate action countries at the moment. So we do not expect lots of progress at these critical moments at this point in time. So you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to do some of the heavy lifting. And then we've got the US elections on the 3rd of November, just a week before the COP. So we'll see what happens. Summary quickly again of where the needle currently is pointing and where it needs to get to. And just now, let me go in the last sort of 10 minutes on another sort of hopefully more inspiring ride as your final, roller coaster moment. So we've had, as a result of, social inequality, the way in which the financial crisis of 2008 has impacted, and the ecological crisis, we have a whole range of movements that have erupted, literally, in France. Before Extinction Rebellion, you had the Gilets Jaunes, who were protesting against what they regarded as unjust road taxes, and in Chile, unjust transportation cost hikes on their tube system, their metro system. Turned out 1 million people on the streets in Chile and cancelled the COP meeting that was supposed to be in Santiago and was shifted to Madrid. And then you've got a whole range of student strikes, for example, going on, essentially looking at the equity dimensions, the fairness dimensions. And sometimes when countries have been taking climate action, they've actually not done it in a way which is socially just. And people have come out in huge and vast numbers. This is where the tanks and the tear gas and the water cannons come out. This is those moments. And those people have said, look, we do want to take action, but we don't want to be the ones who are, scapegoated. You should be taking away taxes and privileges and subsidies from the polluters, essentially, which is what hasn't happened. So a quick run through of some of the most amazing developments. Right here you had Sunrise, before you had XR, occupying the offices of politicians here, demanding essentially a Green New Deal, which is a sort of 10-year warlike mobilization, a 10-year framing to create jobs, to create climate justice, to tackle climate action. In Europe, you've had this remarkable young woman who I've met several times, called Greta Thunberg. And actually, Fridays for Future is very deliberately striking on Fridays because the attempt is for us to shift to a better work-life balance, and for us to have a more leisure-based, nature-based freeing time. And they're also supporting a Green New Deal. And I think that comment by Greta is exactly how I felt. I felt like my response to a climate emergency can't be to write a book, or an article or another report, because no one's reading these or paying attention to them. And I think the kids are absolutely spot on in walking out of school and now are involved in these huge efforts to create a new curriculum. We had in the UK, the students presented a new climate education bill to our parliament two weeks ago. So amazing energy is coming from our young people. As I said, I joined Extinction Rebellion and was sort of coordinator of their political movement. And I think their three main demands are tell the truth about what, where we are, both in terms of impacts, consequences, how far behind we are in terms of our carbon budget and action. Act now, stop focusing on targets and timetables in 30 years' time. Focus on this decade, on 2025, on 2030, and invent a new kind of politics, which we'll talk about, because our current forms of politics, and that's what I feel like, 30 years. I've been waiting for the elections and the right leader and the right president, and then you have to multiply that by 192 because we've got to have the right president, the right leader, in all of the countries, and it's like impossible to herd all these cats, as soon as you've herded them, and then, then the US comes along and rejects it again. So it's like deja vu this time, for me. I was part of the Kyoto Agreement when George Bush came along and rejected it, and I feel very like, I've been there, done that, seen this before, when Trump also rejected it, rejected Paris. They're still in Paris, by the way. You're still in Paris, the US is still in Paris. So yeah, new leaders are emerging everywhere. So one of the big, I think, shifts is these cities and councils and countries as well that are declaring a climate emergency and are then acting on that. So there are many different points, but roughly 800 million people already, it'll get to about 1 billion soon, I think, have declared a climate and ecological emergency and are now involved in understanding how they should respond in that. So in the UK, where this movement has now really taken off, as a large part through this dense collaboration between rebels and existing activist groups and those campaigning for for better transport, better air quality, better lots of things. We've got around 90% of the UK population, around 400 and something councils, you're living in an area that has declared a climate emergency. And many of our councils and cities are essentially reinventing democracy. They're organising what are called citizens' assemblies. And citizens' assemblies are essentially a way of picking 50 to 100, sometimes 300 people on the basis of random selection. So it's like the Athenian random lots, based on a representative sample. And those people come together and deliberate on the basis of expert advice. And those assemblies are now going on in many cities and councils. There's a national assembly going on, and the last weekend of that is on the 22nd of March, like in a couple of weeks' time, and it will report to our parliament. And we had, where I live in Camden, which is a borough in North London, 360,000 people, around 25 to 40 million visitors, home to Google, home to the knowledge economy, Facebook, home to some of the most well-known cultural organisations that you may have heard of, British Museums and many others. But my council had a citizens' assembly as well in July. It was the first council in the UK to do so. I was just lucky it wasn't me. I didn't have anything to do with it particularly. I did go. And they came up with 17 conclusions, which are now part of the Council's plan, which is essentially to decarbonise by 2030. So I'm giving you all these examples because 2030 is the new 2050, remember? And all these councils, all these cities, all these councillors have chosen to act on their own steam, on their own leadership. They're not sitting around waiting for some code, some legislation, some international treaty to kick in for them. They've decided to go ahead and do it. That's just a little time frame for what happened. And this is a picture of the Think and Do space in Camden. And we chose this label, we chose this name because everyone has to think and do something differently as a result of the climate and ecological crisis. Everyone is called on to change and to think about what that means for them. So Think and Do is the basic constituents also, because I did philosophy at uni, it's the basic constituents of what humans do. They think and they do. They don't just think like Cartesian, whatever. It's like uniting essentially our minds and our bodies together and taking action. And the idea is to create Think and Do spaces in every city, every council, every art institution, every architect's office, I hope. So to do that, and then to try and convert and repurpose existing buildings. So you can see from the inside what the cafe looks like, but actually the point is this was a disused cafe that was owned by Camden Council, and it was closed and shut on our high streets, like half the high street has been gutted. So to try and convert existing spaces and reuse them, we've got old furniture, remodeled furniture, local artists, local rebels, many groups collaborated. So yeah, I forgot that I know Cole Roberts had $28 that he offers you, and I've got this fantastic bottle of hand-brewed English gin, which I'm going to offer to anyone. Well, it has to be one person, but you can all come up to the stage. For anyone who wants to organise a Think and Do space, because we're establishing a starter pack and kickstarting this new movement. So this is the new movement that will collaborate at the community level, repurpose and reuse buildings, and bring our creatives and our councillors together. Okay, so I've got about 4 minutes, so I'm going to whiz through this. So what is the role of professional bodies, creatives, cultural spaces? I've just given you the example of Think and Do in Camden. Who has the imagination, frankly, and the willingness to act? Well, all of these groups are declaring their own emergencies, doctors, lawyers, scientists, cultural institutions. I've been involved. This top slide with the white horse, that's the Tate. I don't know if anyone knows where the Tate is. It's like your Getty Museum up the road. It's a hugely iconic and hugely well-visited, that's really difficult to say if you're Pakistani, visited, institution. And I'm standing at the back just under the banner because the arts organisations and the cultural organisations have understood that we can't just see climate change, climate mitigation, climate action as a sort of techno problem for industry and energy geeks to sort out. There is an emotional response, there's a cultural response, there's a psychological response. And so artists and arts organisations are stepping up and literally also converting their spaces, this repurposing of spaces, and taking part and having participatory approaches like citizens' assemblies for their own people. Similarly with music declares. Okay, so architects, you guys, where do you come in? Well, you are major polluters. I'm not going to go through these slides very quickly. You're the ones building the roads. You're the ones saying yes to the airport permissions. You're the ones still churning out buildings that are not LEED. Why not? I'm asking you. You should tell me the answers. You are major polluters. And you, luckily, have the opportunity to fix that. You have the opportunity to change. It's taken you through new build opportunities. We've had fantastic presentations where I've learned so much about what existing spaces, the changes that they need to undergo. And we have to do this quite fast. So I'm just going to use the next couple of minutes to highlight what is going on in the architects community that I know that I found really interesting. So we had UK Architects Declares. This is the 17 Sterling Prize for winners, and around 894 firms which have made a commitment to undertake this set of principles. And they've had a citizens' assembly of their own. Actually, hundreds of people came, like this. It was bigger than this room. And there's all sorts of initiatives happening where they're creating the next steps for them. So this is a very grounded, bottom-up sort of movement. And one of them, one of their commitments that I've highlighted in green is they're going to evaluate, new projects against their contribution, their positive or negative contributions. And so I think personally, saying no is. Do you remember Nancy Reagan? I just saying that. Sometimes saying no to fossil fuel intensive projects that are locking in vast amounts of carbon would be the most radical thing people did, or pausing them, or slowing them down, or saying no, or allowing those members in your firms who don't want to work on that to not work on that. We've got these younger architects, and I went and spoke to them. They just set this up last year. They are doing some of those things that I mentioned. They're trying to push their professions, their principles, their networks of people to take more radical action. We've got an initiative called LETI, the London Energy Transition Initiative, and they're working, again, the date, magic date, 2030, remember is the new 2050. They're all buildings to be operating at net zero and to meet climate targets, and have set up a whole range of tools, materials, guides, which I'm going to take you through in the last 4 seconds of my talk, which are helping the architect profession, the way and all the related professions to come together to start very rapidly transforming our urban environments. So I'm going to take you through that. So the last slide I have in the last minute is, we all watch Star Wars. It's one of the iconic films that I watch with all 4 of my children, actually, that they all can agree on. And this time, after years of governments, especially in the UK, speaking as a UK-based lawyer, ignoring climate science, government decisions ignoring the spirit and the letter of the law of the Paris Agreement, some lawyers finally took the decision to take the government to court on the government's decision to build a third runway, give approval to the third runway at Heathrow, which has been discussed for like a decade and a bit, and it's very controversial for many reasons. But essentially, the group of lawyers that I'm talking about took the government to court on the basis that it was breaching its Paris obligations, and that the expansion of Heathrow would undermine the UK's own national legislation, which is net zero by 2050. The UK legislated for that last year, but largely as a result of the rebellion, actually. So, and the Court of Appeal finally, on the 27th of February, restored my faith in law, frankly, which is one of the reasons I'd glued myself to Shell. It's like, what's the point of me agreeing all the, negotiating agreeing all these if these treaties, if they're ignored? And the government, the court of law actually just essentially said it was unlawful for the government to rely on an old national planning statement which had not been revised to take the Paris targets into account. And it was unlawful for the government to have not looked at the full range of gases and the full timeframes. It's a slightly detailed decision, but you should really read it if you're interested. And it was a breach of their obligations to allow this expansion to take place without the proper assessment. So they couldn't say, Heathrow itself is unlawful, that they sent the government back. So since last week, since that decision on the 27th of February, 3 more cases have been filed, essentially to stop the government's road planning, road building plans, to stop the government's plans to build this HS2 link, high-speed rail link, which destroys a lot of our biodiversity, ancient woodlands, doesn't do anything except make the train journey slightly faster for a few people. And a third case has been filed on a coal station. Yeah, we're still building coal and fracking, right? So this is the extent of what we need to do. But I'm going to end it there because I wanted to end on a positive note that governments and lawyers, doctors, architects, citizens, students are rising up everywhere and taking leadership. And we're fighting back, and we're fighting back on the basis that we're going to win. In some perverse way, I think the coronavirus is going to be a massive reset for us all and require us to be still, to be in our communities, to really examine how our lifestyles need to be changing. And I really hope that some of you come up and claim this bottle of gin. It's for those people who want to be part of this effort to think and do something differently. And I want to say finally, thank you very much for letting me have a few extra minutes. Cheers.